Hello, everyone. Welcome today. We're so glad that you could join us. I am excited for you to meet my good friend, Haley Dollins. She is going to be sharing some things that are really passionate to her heart and some experience that she's had involving missions. So we're going to jump into that soon. But before we do, Haley, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, how long you've been at Substance.
Yes. So it feels like forever because I feel like it really has been. I'm married to Ben, 18, almost 19 years, and we have 4 kiddos. We have 15, 13, 10, and just turned 3. Truett and Macy are our biological kiddos, and our unique story that blends into this a little is that our third child, Lucia, who's 10, was adopted and is Mexican in her heritage as well from her biological family. And then we had a little COVID surprise in that her biological mom had a baby during COVID, so we now have a Lila as well. And we have been at Substance 15 years this month. We were the old people at Substance.
Come on.
With very few of the only children at Substance back then. And so it's so fun to see that multiply. Mom's group was much smaller back then when I was the young one with my babies in Mom's group. But we've been at Substance 15 years, and I work locally here as trained as a dental hygienist, and really went into it because of a desire and passion to do something that served people in missions vocationally. And I work just down the road, actually, now recruiting dentally for Apple Tree Dental as a nonprofit here in the Twin Cities.
Oh, that's awesome. So I know missions is so passionate for you. How did you decide to start getting your family involved in doing mission type things?
Yes, well, my husband would say it's all my fault, but I really look back and know how God just walked us through things, right, that really lined all of those desires that he put in my heart at 12, 15 years old, from my first missions trip to Costa Rica with Focus on the Family, actually, and Brio magazine for all of you in your 30s and 40s. And yes, and so I went on that first missions trip that was evangelistic and loved it, but saw the need that I wanted to be able to share Christ with a gift of something I could give. And so that's what really drew me in and made me decide at that age, even at 15, to go into dentistry. And then really just as we started having kiddos, said, how do we plan this in a way that this can be something that is how we live out Christ and really be hands and feet? And so, how do we create fruit in our lives that our kids get to see in a daily walk? And so, that was really the seed planted. But we quickly found out that bringing our kids was really hard to do locally outside of our church. It's, hey, you can go to Feed My Starving Children at 5 was the youngest we found, but the kids don't get direct contact maybe with the people they're in need with and that are in need and they're serving. And then maybe to go to a soup kitchen, you have to be 12 or 13. And so we started looking at ways that we could serve and go outside of the 4 walls. I always say the 4 walls of a dental office to my colleagues or the 4 walls of the church, with our family.
Wow. So then you decided, hey, let's just put our finger in the map and say, let's go here. Or what, how did you decide? How did you decide moving outside of the States?
Yeah, so I'd done quite a few missions trips at that point, dentally, in Central and South America. But Jess and Andy Nunez, who had been on staff here at Substance, had moved to her parents' orphanage that they started 35 years ago. And they moved back for her to help as a nurse to start a medical clinic and said, hey, would you be open to starting a dental clinic with us? And so I took our 7 and 5-year-old at that time with me, and we went down for a week and started to see the building that they were building and where things were at, and worked in a makeshift clinic for the week there.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did your kids do? I mean, they're little, they're young. Were they afraid? Were they excited? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, good question. So everyone asked me that of they were really young. How did you do this? And of course, Ben stayed home with our youngest at the time also, it was 2. And so I kind of went on the fact-finding trip and quickly fell in love with the kiddos. There's about 100 plus kids now at the orphanage. And the way was to be able to, really for me, the kids were young enough they could rip off the Band-Aid and just go, right? It was, we're getting on an airplane, it's fun, we can do this. And it was maybe a little easier in knowing the Nunezes. We didn't know them very well. Really have gotten to know them since they've been here in Minnesota. But being able to go somewhere and allow them the opportunity to just be kids and be around other kids, we found that that was a way to allow them to just do something that maybe felt a little more normal.
So what do they actually do now? You've been going for a couple of years, like more than a couple.
6, 7 years
Many
now.
years,
Yeah.
right? And your kids are growing up. And what do they do when they go to hang out at this orphanage?
Yeah, so our first trip, the kids were in Spanish immersion school, and so they just finished second grade in kindergarten. And so it was an opportunity for them to go and practice their Spanish. That was kind of the excuse. But we also, they went, I have a picture of Macy, toothless, with her little scrubs and adult-sized gloves, and in the clinic suctioning for me with this big toothless grin and all excited. And just being able to be with the kids, whether it was maybe she'd be in the clinic and suction for a while, and then she would go out. So we got that bonding time together, but then she'd maybe go out on the playground and play with the kids. And I learned very quickly not to underestimate that relationship building and that bond, even if there is a language barrier, what that could do. But they may go weed in the landscaping and pull out weeds that they could, learn at a young age to do. They may go help set the table at a meal or sweep the floors in a dorm. But even this last summer, our kids, now being, 15, 13, 10, and 3, our 3 older ones were helping build a walking path and putting pavers down all week. They've helped paint the dorms and the hallways. Last summer, they got to go into the school and help teach English in the English classes in the K-12 school at the orphanage. So they've done a variety of things over the years, and we love that we're able to help plug them in where each of us can bloom with our giftings.
Yeah. You talked about your kids knowing Spanish, and it was like a beautiful thing to go and they could like practice their Spanish, which is great. So we did a little missions trip where we went, well, I shouldn't say it was a missions trip. We went to Bangkok, Thailand, because I used to live there a long time ago, and it was like our dream trip to get our kids back, and they've never seen it, so I wanted to show them. But anyway, I didn't want it just to be a trip. I wanted to do something missional, and when I lived there, I used to work at a daycare for kids, and it was in the middle of the slums, and so I wanted to take my kids to this daycare. And so they know zero Thai. And I haven't been there for like 25 years, so my Thai is like all gone practically. But, even when you don't know the language very well, it's true. Like you can get through that barrier because people are people. Humanity is humanity. And I loved seeing my kids interact with these other kids. And, it impacted. Honestly, we all know sometimes mission trips can really impact the person who's going. Let's be honest.
The giver more than the receiver, maybe. Yes,
right.
The role can be reversed quickly.
So I would see that with my kids so much. But then it is true, just having someone different come and having a different interaction can really bless the kids there. So all that to say, you don't have to know the language perfectly to go on a missions trip.
Not at all.
And it can be... It just can be very organic, and kids are just kids. It's amazing how they connect.
Yeah, so. I would say, today, we were just there a month ago with our kids. We were there almost 2 weeks this time, and quite frankly, my 2 Mexicanas daughters don't speak a word of Spanish outside of hola, gracias, ¿cómo estás? And even my Spanish, I'm always renewing every time.
Yeah.
And I'm going 2 or 3 times a year. But with that being said, 95% of the people I bring as dental providers and other healthcare providers down to the orphanage speak nothing of the language. But on that last night before we leave, there's always a goodbye, closing ceremony kind of as a thank you. And these kids get up and they share about how the group that was there that week impacted their life. And I have yet in 7 years of bringing groups seen a dry eye. And for me, that is that testimony that God's love, and even many of the people I bring are not believers, but that God's love is a two-way street, and that really is that opening conduit to be able to just be people together. And in our situation, and I think in a lot of third world countries or developing countries too, as Americans, we may not speak their language, but they've heard English quite a bit. So there's often that as well.
Yeah, sure. I've seen
For
that
sure.
too.
But those weepy eyes always tell me in the lives and the stories I hear them come back with that the language part was not the barrier. And with my 2 younger ones not speaking Spanish, we get to see that regularly too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what about like the impact that like just missions, serving other people in general has made on their own personal life? Like what is the fruit that you've seen that's come out of this for your children and your family?
I could tell the stories for hours and not exaggerating at all. I've seen everything be equally different with every single trip.
Okay.
And I'm always surprised in what that looks like. One of the things that we've noticed is all 4 of our children are very different humans. Sometimes I wonder how we could have 4 kids that could be that different. But with each of them, one of the things, is each trip can be different in the ages and stages they're in. So when we go back to when's the right time to do it, or how do we get over fears of our kids going, the ones, they've all gone at a younger age where maybe they didn't have as many fears. What we found is as they get older, they start to have sometimes more irrational fears, right?
Yep.
Of like, well, okay, are we going to have Wi-Fi? And that's something important, right? And they're not allowed to use it there anyway, but it is there for their safety blanket. But those things we've seen with each of our kids. The example I've used this year is our 15-year-old, who's pretty introverted. Most people don't believe me. But he went and he keeps telling us, I don't speak Spanish anymore, Mom and Dad. And so this year, I just said, you know what? We have 3 kids that we sponsor at the orphanage. And out of those 3, the oldest is a boy that's just slightly older than him. They both love sports. And so while he's not great at connecting with him when we're not there, this year I just said, you know what? I'm going to let him figure this out. They've known each other for years. We're going to let them figure out their relationship. And so he started going and sitting with these 25 teenage boys at each meal 3 times a day. And I thought they were just sitting next to each other. And very quickly, well, I shouldn't say that, maybe 5 days in, it took a while. I looked at my husband one day and I was like, are they just sitting over there in silence? He said, no. He said, our son is speaking full conversations in Spanish with these boys. And they're not just talking about what they're eating for lunch. They're having maybe not really deep life conversations, but they're having sincere conversations. And some of the staff by the end of the week even said, this drew the boys out in a different way. And so I use that example. Our daughter is deciding, or has decided in her mind, that she's going back next summer. So, and she wants to be able to spend the summer there. So seeing how in their different stages and those things, they've really been impacted, but to see them come home and do that as well has been huge. How, they've started a pen pal program at their school in their Spanish class with this kids there, or they come home and decide they're going to do X and save their money for this thing they know the needs are. So that's been a huge thing to see, and it's just beautiful to see how that changes year to year as well.
Yeah. I feel really passionate about my children having an international lens that they look at life through. And I went to school for missions. I was very passionate about missions. I've always been passionate about missions. And I'm passionate about different cultures. And so that's something that Josh and I are really strongly wanting our children to have different experiences, so that they realize that it's not just, the whole world is not just like what we live in.
Yes.
It's so different, and it's all
Instant
valuable.
gratification can look very different in different places.
Yes. So
expectations.
I guess as we close today, is there anything else that you would want to share, maybe encouraging moms? They're moms. I know that some of you probably have thought missions, oh, I'd love to do this. And some of you haven't ever given this a thought, or that seems way too far away. How and why could and should people get involved or get connected, just starting the ball rolling with their families of starting to think missionally?
Yeah. Well, as you said, I think Pastor Peter will often talk about your pet purpose, right? And for me, I can name 2 very quickly, missions being one of them. But I think we're all called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We're all called to bear fruit. And of course, that comes with pruning and other things. And I see how that has pruned me in life, changed my expectations, what I come home with. And I mean, it completely decided the trajectory of my career, right? And I know that has impacted my children, and I hope and pray that it will impact my children's children. But I guess I would say 2 things. I think I hear from people, number one, of okay, it's on my bucket list, or hey, we're waiting until our kids are old enough. And I would really encourage you, if there's any way for you to do it, to just rip the Band-Aid off. And I know that it's vacation time, family time, finances, budgeting, all those things that come to mind, right? And they're real things. I mean, we've made some big sacrifices, especially in the earlier years, of how can we afford to do this. But at this point, our family has decided, as our kids are older, they get to be part of that. And they've said, we'd rather go to the orphanage than go on a beach vacation.
Wow,
and so
that's huge.
It is huge, but they are seeing how they've developed relationships, and these kids and the people there are family. The Mexican people have become part of their extended family. But I would say be part of, find something. God had a season where he very, very specifically told me, like, you have kids right now where your missions need to be out your own back door.
That's good.
And so there were those seasons, and it was hard for me to stay home because I had been all over the map.
You, me, and Jonna.
Yes,
Jonna Nadal is a friend of ours, too, and she's the same.
Very quick connection we made many, many years ago at Substance over missions and that desire. And I was in a stay-at-home mode at that point, and I knew it was a directive.
Sure.
So, but then also just find that way. And, so maybe it's something small, maybe it's something huge, but just being open to that. And if there's anything that I can share, find another mom. You guys will find them in your discussions today, I'm sure, and it'll be someone you had no idea had this passion or background. But I'm more than happy to have a conversation and just to be able to let God lead in those things. And sometimes, honestly, those are the things that feel like, nope, this is not what I want to do. And I could tell a whole nother story about that, but I ended up in Bolivia on a riverboat through Billy Graham or Samaritan's Purse after seeing something online saying, God, I would go anywhere but there. And 2 years later, they called and said, could you go to Bolivia? I don't know how I got your phone number, but could you go to Bolivia? I'm like, oh, when? In 5 weeks. And I lived on a riverboat in Bolivia and did dental work for 2 weeks. And so those are the things that I think sometimes when we're kicking and screaming that God molds us and stretches us the most.
Oh my gosh, so good. So good. I wish we could talk longer.
Yes.
But I just want to just encourage everybody as you get into your discussions in your groups, like really just take some time and process what is God's purpose and plan for doing outreach within your own life. And just like you said, Haley, I think you said it so beautifully, it can happen right in your backyard. And that, number one, honestly, our number one mission is our kids. So let's just remember that. But there may be other things that God might be doing and stirring in your heart. And hopefully this conversation might fuel that a little bit too. So love you, ladies. See you next time.